Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the CDSA Wednesday webinar series. Thank you for taking time out to join us. I think there are more than 1,000 individuals who've joined, at least who have registered, mostly from academia, clinical researchers, ethics committee members and students, and also some researchers from industry. I am Usha Menon. I'm professor at the Medical Research Council Clinical Trials Unit at University College London. For the last few years, it has been my privilege to mentor and guide the team at CDSA. Today, we are going to continue the theme that was initiated by Professor Y.K. Gupta on issues relevant to clinical research in the COVID era. In this current series of 3 lectures, what we would like to do is explore digital tools and solutions and platforms that can support and facilitate studies, trials throughout its entire life cycle, from planning to reporting and publication. None of these tools have been specifically created for the pandemic era. They have been around, but they're even more useful. So we thought this would be an opportunity to highlight them. Here at CDSA, we strongly feel that digital tools can improve the quality of research, whatever the aspect: governance, stakeholder engagement, participant safety, data quality. All these digital platforms can help. And what we hope to do is showcase what is available. And this is what these talks are about. We're also keen to develop India-specific tools where appropriate. And today we will highlight 2 of those. We would like to encourage and support researchers to use validated platforms for trials and studies. And within CDSA, we have set up a number of validated platforms that we make available to the trials and studies that we support. So with regards to this webinar series, today, of course, we are going to showcase some tools which will facilitate design and setup, so in the initial stages of this life cycle. And then on the 25th of November, we are going to explore some tools which will improve participant engagement, so in the area of setup and conduct. And most likely on the 9th of December, we shall have a session on some platforms that could support conduct and analysis. There are, of course, many more tools that you could use. I hope at some point we can bring them to you as well. So there is social media that you could use for stakeholder engagement. Many of you might be very familiar with using online survey platforms, and it'd be great to look at them and find what works and doesn't work. Increasingly, there's digital health technology wearables, and in trials, these are being used to collect endpoints. So either secondary outcomes or primary outcomes also I have seen more recently. There are digital interventions, and that even was looking, there was this trial B positive for COVID, and it was a digital mental health intervention that was being researched. And finally, you could do follow-up through linking to patients' electronic health records. And this is going to be increasingly possible in India with the Aadhaar card and with electronic medical health records. So coming to today's session, the first talk will be given by Dr. Amrita Shekhar, a senior fellow at THSTI and CDSA. She will talk about the clinical trials toolkit for India. Many countries have country-specific toolkits. You can see the one for the UK and for Australia. USA has got websites where there is information about clinical trials. All of them provide really very specific, country-specific practical advice about regulations and the governance to be followed. This will be followed by online ethics application and review platform demonstrated by Dr. Neha Chawla. She's again a fellow at CDSA. This Create EC is a collaboration with FIRST, the Federation of Ethics Research Committees of India, and PATH. And once she gives a talk, we will have a very, very key contribution from Dr. Anil Purti, Registrar and Professor of Community Medicine at PIMS in Puducherry. He will tell us both the advantages and the challenges of using it on the ground. And finally, we will then move on to the Q&A. And in the Q&A, we are really privileged to be joined by Dr. Urmila Thatte. Many of you will know her. She was professor and head of Department of Pharmacology at KEM Mumbai. But for this session, she joins us in her role as secretary for C. And just before I hand over, a couple of housekeeping points. The chat box is open. As we go through the lecture, the talks, please feel free to write any questions that you have in the chat box. We will really disable the chat box at the end of the talks once the Q&A starts, because then it will be distracting after that and we will not be able to monitor it. So if you have questions, please put them in before the Q&A starts. And finally, thank you so much for all the questions that you've already sent us. It has been circulated to all the speakers. Some of those questions have been incorporated into the talk so that they are answered, and some of them we will take at the Q&A. So thank you, and I hope you find this very helpful. Dr. Amrita will now take over and tell you about the toolkit.
Good afternoon, everybody. And as already mentioned by Professor Menon, I will be talking about the Clinical Trials Toolkit for India. So I'm Amrita, and I'm a part of the Clinical Research Support Services at CDSA. So as already mentioned by Professor Menon, clinical trials toolkits are used by various countries across the world to help clinical researchers navigate the very complex steps that are required to be borne in mind while conducting a clinical trial. And we wanted to really build on this and design something very similar for clinical researchers in India. So what we have designed, and CDSA in collaboration with MRC CTU has designed, is the Clinical Trials Toolkit for India. So many of you are researchers, and you know that when you're thinking or conceptualizing a clinical trial, you have to think of many, many steps and many, many processes that you need to keep in mind. In addition, every country has its own specific guidelines, rules, and regulations for the conduct of clinical trials. So as a new researcher, thinking about all these things can be fairly daunting. And even for experienced researchers, it can be quite challenging to keep up with the new regulations and the new guidelines. There are multiple sites that one has to look at and survey all the time to keep up to date. And the Clinical Trials Toolkit is really our endeavor to try and make this a simpler process for clinical researchers. So this toolkit has been designed keeping in mind best practices for clinical trials, both in India and globally. It is, of course, while it is based on the NIHR toolkit, which is used in the UK for publicly funded clinical trials, this is very much, of course, adapted to the Indian context and has rules and regulations that are necessary to be borne in mind while conducting a clinical trial in India. The toolkit can be accessed through the website. The link is provided in this slide. This toolkit was launched officially by Dr. Renu Swarup, Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology, last year at the Global India Bio Summit in November. And while making the toolkit, we have sought the advice and inputs from several experts These are trialists, they are experts in ethics, independent experts, policy makers, so regulatory bodies, etc. So various stakeholders have given us their very valuable time and contribution while designing the toolkit. And I'd just like to show you some of these people. This list is not exhaustive, but just is indicative of the people who've contributed to developing this toolkit. So I'll just quickly talk about how one goes through the toolkit. So central to the toolkit is really a route map. And the way we've thought about the route map is that it is a process map which describes the various steps that one should have in mind while thinking about conducting a clinical trial. So essentially, when you access the website, you have a route map that is mentioned on the tab. And when you click on it, it opens this page which gives you this diagram of the route map. So each step is a phase of the clinical trial. So it starts at the left with trial planning, and then you move sequentially to trial setup, approvals and registrations, the management and oversight groups, and end at archiving. Within each step, there are multiple other steps that are to be considered while you're thinking about a clinical trial. Now, you will notice that some of these steps have been marked in red, and these are because these are the mandatory requirements for any regulatory clinical trial in India. The rest of the steps are, of course, good practice requirements, and they've been highlighted in blue. So to navigate the toolkit, you come to the route map, and essentially you can click on any of these boxes. And clicking on a box will take you to a web page that will contain information on the various aspects of that particular step that you need to keep in mind. If there are any regulations, if there are any guidelines by any agencies which pertain to that step in particular, then these two are referred to in that web page. For instance, when I click on, say, essential documents, I'm taken to a page which then starts talking about what all are included as a part of essential documents. Now, in order to navigate this route map, I can either go back to the route map to move to the next step on the tab on the top of the screen, or I can also click next. And additionally, on the bottom right corner, you will notice that there is a section which says key components. And under the key components, again, we've mentioned the various steps of the clinical trial. So you can just scroll down and you can click on any of these, and this will also take you to the relevant web page. Now, we've done all of this to try and ensure that it's as easy to navigate as possible, and you don't have to keep going back to a particular starting point to start your navigation exercise. Now, another thing that we've done is, for instance, within essential documents, and I'm using this as a representative example, but this applies to all the steps in the route map, is when you click on the page and it starts describing content in essential documents. Here, for instance, we've described a case record form. We've also provided, as you can see in this encircled section, saying in this document, a format or a document that contains information on what should be mentioned in a case record form. Now, these documents have been borrowed from best practices and publicly available documents if they exist, or we have compiled documents which basically, again, take information from sites on what the particular format should look like and what is the information that needs to be contained. So we've done all this to try and make it as easy for researchers to generate these documents for their trials as possible. Now, another thing that that is a part of the toolkit is this section called Recent Changes to the Toolkit. And there is a news section on the toolkit. Now, these two sections are available on the home page of the toolkit. Now, the CDSA team, the toolkit team, we survey all the websites, for instance, the CDSEO website, the ICMR website, websites of all important government agencies and international agencies to see if there are any changes in clinical trial rules, or are there any new guidelines? Is there any new document in the public domain which would be of interest to researchers? And we update that and we add it to the toolkit. This we feel is particularly valuable for even experienced researchers who could be very familiar with the route map, but will definitely, of course, find this section very useful because they'll know what are the new things that they need to watch out for. For instance, in the news section of the toolkit, we have collated the COVID-specific information. And of course, this is just a representative example. There are recent guidance has been published on vaccine requirements for COVID-19 vaccines, etc. So you can click on any of these and you can get a link to the actual more detailed circular and notices. Finally, I would like to end by saying that the toolkit is not static, simply because we all know that clinical trials keep changing, methodologies keep changing, there are new innovations, new discoveries, regulations keep changing. So we are constantly trying to keep the toolkit very up to date. And of course, it is very useful to researchers, but we want everyone to engage with it. And so we really would appreciate it if you could all, when in your spare time, we'd be very grateful if you could visit the site and you can provide us with some valuable feedback on things that you think we should do or how we can improve the way you can navigate the toolkit and the information that we've got on the website. So we have a feedback form, which is again on the homepage of the toolkit in the bottom right. And if you click this button which says go to feedback form, then you essentially are provided with a template where you can give us feedback. And yeah, so that is about the toolkit. And thank you very much for your time. And any questions or comments, please do type them in the chat box and we shall take them up for discussion during the question and answer session. Thank you. I shall now request my colleague Neha to take over and present on CREATE.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Amrita. My name is Neha, and I work as a senior research officer at the Clinical Development Services Agency. I'm going to go through CREATE, a digital software suite that has been developed. CREATE was originally co-developed by FERC and PATH and launched in the year 2017. Starting 2019, the Clinical Development Services Agency, CDSA, and the MRCCTU at UCL, we've joined efforts and to improve and enhance the user experience. CREATE is essentially a software suite at the core of which is a software known as the Electronic Ethics Committee, or EEC for short. EEC is an online ethics application platform and has been designed keeping in mind the guidelines available for Ethics Committee in India, issued by the Indian Council of Medical Research, and also the new drugs and clinical trial rules issued by the CDSCO. And they also borrow heavily from the standard operating procedures, or the SOPs, that have been developed by FERC for ethics committees in India. The main objectives for CREATE are to develop or create an integrated research application platform or system for researchers and research institutions in India. It also aims to empower these institutions to enhance the management of their review process for the research using a very robust digital platform. CREATE also aims to empower researchers to improve the quality of their proposals and to facilitate a common review process for multi-center research in India. As I said, the core software for CREATE is the EEC. I will talk about that in detail now. EC basically is an online or a digital platform that will allow researchers of an institute to submit their ethics applications online and their subsequent review by the committees. The way it has been built, it allows for a seamless and transparent process of application while ensuring that this data remains entirely confidential and secure. There are two options or modalities available for EEC. The first is where the institutes use their own forms for ethics application, which are then uploaded as PDFs by the researchers, along with all supporting documents requested. The other modality is where the institute is using the ICMR common forms for ethics review. In doing so, the data is stored in a searchable database onto the software and can be used to facilitate future submissions. The extra advantage of using the ICMR common forms through EEC is that the researcher fills up these applications online. I'll just take you through some of the screens within the software just to show what it looks like and will help you visualize it a little more. Once the software is installed and configured for an institution, EC can be accessed online. Now, the access is through the login details of a researcher. It can be accessed through the link provided. The PI's login screen looks a little like this, which is called the dashboard. It is divided into quick links for accessing projects with submissions that have gone through. The dashboard also gives you notifications, and the PI can submit new projects by clicking on the button that is highlighted. As I mentioned earlier, if the institute is using the ICMR common forms, since the forms are quite comprehensive, what the CREATE team has done is implemented filter questions. What I mean by filter questions is that before you begin an application, you will be asked a couple of questions regarding the type of application you would like to submit, whether it is for a systematic review or a clinical trial. And once you do so, the form will automatically be pre-filled with not applicable. Not applicable will be filled for those questions that do not apply to the type of research. For example, if you are submitting an application for a systematic review, you will not be asked to fill up questions relating to participant recruitment. Moving to the next screen. If the institute is using their own forms, they can be submitted as PDF, as I initially mentioned, and can be submitted to the ethics committee for review. The dashboard for the ethics committee members do look a little similar to what it does for the principal investigator. The dashboard serves as a reminder to the members and to the admin, the IEC admin, as to whichever proposals have been submitted for review. Similarly for the member secretary and also for the chairperson. A member can either view the documents submitted for review, download it, or look at its previous versions, and then put down comments for their review before a meeting has been set up. The member secretary will be able to notify the members of the committee of all meetings have been set up through the software and also upload an agenda for the upcoming meeting. The member secretary can also upload minutes of the meeting and decisions that were taken during the meeting. The principal investigator is then informed of a decision taken and sent the relevant notifications and documents through the software itself. This is roughly what the process flow looks like while using the software. The PI is requested to register and log in and set up, their login systems. They can submit their application to the ethics committee, which is filtered by project type and the type of review requested. It is then sent to the IEC admin, who reviews it for completeness and other administrative details. The IEC admin will then forward this proposal to the member secretary for review, and for the member secretary to assign reviewers for this project. Once the members receive the notification that they've been assigned or asked to review a project, they do so. Non-assigned members can also review the documents, but they will not be able to comment. Once the meeting has been done or the decision finalized, the member secretary will then issue the decision letter, which is then communicated electronically to the PI through EEC. Once the proposal has been approved, all subsequent submissions or queries can be submitted by the PI to the committee through the software. For example, the researcher will be able to notify of any protocol deviations, of any amendment, or even SAEs through the software. EC has been built following all, EC has been built using all guidelines that have been issued by the ICMR, and as I mentioned, this SOP is by FERC. It also is compliant with the guidelines issued by the Ministry of India, the METI guidelines. The servers are located in India, and it is hosted on Microsoft Azure. It is an extremely secure and a cloud-based software with an access-controlled workflow. The software also will allow the admin to generate reports on the usage and also to evaluate the number of projects and proposals submitted through the software. Some of the advantages of using the software: it does provide for a streamlined submission and review process and does significantly save time and storage space and also printing costs for an ethics committee. It will provide increased data privacy, security, and confidentiality, and will help the committee track user activity and in optimal decision making. It does provide real-time tracking of projects and follows the ethics committee hierarchy. It allows to keep all external and internal communication in one place and can be accessed from any time and from anywhere. Institutes that wish to implement EC at an institute, the process that the team now follows is that the CDSA Create team will train and all members of the committee, including the admin, and also the researchers at an institute, and also help with installation and configuration. How we do that is by demonstrating the software to the institute, followed up by a meeting. Once the necessary approvals have been received, we follow that up with training for each member and also for the researchers. The team will then help you configure the software to the system and also help with registration of all investigators. The next phase of this is a hand-holding phase, wherein we will walk you through application submitted online using the software and also its subsequent review. The team will constantly stay in touch with you in case there are any queries or any issues with using the software. The software right now is available free of cost to all institutions in India. However, we may implement a subscription cost for an annual license. This is the Create team, and if you do wish to, you can write to us on this email, and Geet and Namrata will definitely get back to you. We're fortunate to have many institutes in India using EEC. However, we do have Dr. Anil Purti with us today during the webinar, and he's, as Professor Menon earlier introduced him, he's the registrar and also the head of Department of Community Medicine at PIMS Puducherry, and he will now speak to us regarding his experience of using the software. I will now hand over to Dr. Purti. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And It's a great opportunity to be able to meet and share our little experience while we are still learning. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone, including Professor Urmila Thate and Dr. Varun and many others who played a pivotal role when this concept first came into reality, and then the team built on, and with CDSA team working now to provide all the necessary support, things really have improved. I must say the toolbox that was shared by the first speaker, Dr. Amrita, is really something that will make it much more easier. Of course, our little experience goes to the days when we didn't have that toolkit, but going back and thinking, I'd like to briefly share our little experience, and probably some of it could be useful to the audience or some of you who are participating in today's webinar. I happen to also be not only a user, but a member of the Institute Ethics Committee. And for the present, I'm also chairing another IEC of the Pondicherry University in Pondicherry. As Dr. Neha has already shared, we count it a privilege to be a part of this network, to join the CREATE team, and once the formalities of registering the institute at the particular in the platform, you can have your institute enlisted in the list that we can see on the right side, institutions. There is a login and password, and this is the first page that any institute could see them. And after the registration is over, the first page would display who is the chairperson, their designation, and who is the member secretary of that particular ethics committee. And then, as Dr. Neha has shared, there are ways of navigating inside. I'm sure each one of us will find it very useful. We find it very useful in the way, and I'm using this dashboard from our own IEC, where, even during COVID times, or even before, a little before that, each investigator or the PI's name, there is names of PIs here, whose protocol at that time was under IEC review, or those who also had received a letter of approval. So in a single dash, and 12, 13, 14, a number of pages, it becomes very easy for any member of the ethics committee to be able to very quickly review and see what needs to be done, what is the process, and also getting at some questions or clarifications from the PIs or others in the group as we progress along doing the review work. This is an added advantage because many of you, including me, who have over the years got quite used to have a physical meeting face-to-face to review. And while there are good points about that, some of the challenges are constraints due to time, space, availability, and getting everyone together around the same table. EEC helps in circumventing those challenges, and the smooth, efficient process of the ethics review work could go on smoothly with and keeping everyone in the loop. I just would like to, put in a few bullet points of summarizing some of our learning experiences. As I just mentioned, it increases definitely the efficiency where the work is done quickly. I suppose, and may I also share, gone are the days when as PIs who required to go after members of the ethics committee, trying to speeden up the process because either the funding partner or there was a deadline by other agency. Much of that has been reduced to the minimum because at the click of a mouse, they can quite easily know what is pending and what it needs to be done. The second advantage is during the course of the review and proposals, everything need not wait till the end. A comment or a suggestion or a clarification could quite easily on a particular point be shared with the PI or any other expert who could be invited, and their suggestions could be got online and all are in the same page or attached to the same document when we are involved in reviewing a particular proposal. We've been able to extend this not only to faculty, but to postgraduate students. I believe initially, at least for medical colleges in India, postgraduates and the dissertation work they do, not many of them do clinical trials. However, for academic trials, also for studies as part of the dissertation that they need to complete, we've been able to adapt this digital platform so that we are conveniently able to review them, and also the concerned PIs or postgraduate students are able to modify and submit their revised proposals before a stipulated date. So when the full committee meets, all the documents are in place in a digital platform and can quite efficiently be looked into. I would like to say that the research updates that Dr. Amrita mentioned at the beginning are very, very useful for anyone looking at recent updates of what's happening. For example, if you're looking about a clinical trial in a particular topic, these research updates very quickly, since they're networked with clinical trials in USA, in UK, in Europe, in Australia, including parts of Asia. It's a ready reckoner to find out what has been some of the updates in some of these important academic or regulatory forums. I think the templates that have been provided now, while each institute have their own independence to have or develop their own formats. We are so grateful that the Indian Council of Medical Research has put together a team and they prepared this formatted, which could be reviewed, of course, which could be always tinkered a little, but at the end of it, there are these good digital templates for each type of studies that need to be reviewed by the ethics committee, and I think they are very, very handy. Needless to say, it's been covered. It saves time both for PI, saves time for members of the ethics committee, and the immense efforts for documentation and storing these important piece of documents as per regulation, as per CDSO guidelines, has become very, very easy. Perhaps gone are the days when we used to open up these big cupboards and have hard copies and keep them safe, protecting them from climatic changes, humidity, not to forget some of the other bugs that get to these documents, which perhaps need to be kept for 5 to 10 years. And I believe for those members of the ethics committee, this digital program would help in the due accreditation process of that IEC. Since Dr. Neha mentioned about another institute, JIPMER, Pondicherry, another institute of national importance, I had the opportunity to also study there for some time. They recently had an accreditation process, and as observers, we found out having a digital platform to maintain records was always very useful. Perhaps there have been challenges, but I'll just summarize and say there are probably some issues, but I think with help and support readily made by other members of the IEC and very, very supportive team from CDSA, who are always readily available either over phone or definitely over emails, and have been hand-holding not only us, but I'm sure many others in helping us carry out with this important task of reviewing of proposals submitted to the ethics committee. I'll stop with that. And if there are any questions or clarification or doubts with pertain to this, we'll be glad to take it towards them in the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Purti. We shall now, I'm not, for in the interest of time and in order to make sure that we get the most out of this time for the panel, I'm not going to reintroduce the panel, except to say that the people who have spoken today and who are on this panel play multiple roles and wear many hats. And they're here with us on this panel in their capacities of the roles that they have played with respect to developing and contributing to these various resources that we have discussed in this session. So I'd like to welcome all of you again to this panel. And so as has already been stated by Professor Menon, we have gone through all the questions that were raised at the time of registration. We've made every attempt to address as many of these questions by incorporating them in our talks. In addition, we are aware that a lot of you have raised many questions on the chat box, and we will, of course, address these depending on time availability. However, I would urge you to remember that if there is anything that you feel is a pressing question with regards to everything that has been discussed today, which is not adequately addressed, then please do feel free to write to us, and we'd only be too happy to answer your questions. There are also some questions that were raised in the online session, which actually pertain to the webinars that are yet to follow in this series. So people are really jumping the gun and thinking ahead about digital tools, which is very good news for us. So these will be addressed in the subsequent webinars. So to start with today's discussion, I would really like to start by asking Dr. Thatte about how was EEC conceptualized and designed?
Actually, can you hear me, Amrita?
Yes, Dr. Thatte, we can hear you.
PATH approached us some years ago. It was long ago, it was maybe 10 years ago. And they said that they were willing to, they had a scheme which would support development of solutions which will help ethics committees perform their functions better. And when we brainstormed in the department, one of the things that we thought of, and we have been facing this problem with our own ethics committee a lot, and that was of developing this kind of an EEC solution. And we thought this would be a very important. In fact, this whole Create suite contains 5 different softwares. But the one that we are really following up now is EEC. And we're talking about that today. So it was, all 5 were developed, in which today we are going to talk about EEC. And it came up because of our own problems, that we needed to have something that kept records, that allowed us to work online, that allowed us to look at only soft copies without having to worry about carrying huge bundles of papers, transmitting them around and sending them across to individual EC members. And all the EC members could look at the same the protocols at the same time. It really gave so many advantages. And as somebody mentioned, I think Neha mentioned, we use the SOPs that were developed. Many of the FERC SOPs were developed based on the KEM Ethics Committee SOPs. So we use these SOPs, and based on all our own difficulties, we set up this system. Our own experience, actually, every little step in the coding of that EEC was based on our experience. So it developed like that.
Okay, thank you. And when did KEM start using EEC? Which years?
I don't remember the year, but it was whenever it was first introduced. KEM was, I think, one of the first institutions that took it and started using it. It was easy for us to use it because it was based on our SOP. So we didn't have to change our system or methodology at all. It was just, it was easy for us. I don't remember. It was whenever it was the first time, it was us who used it.
And sorry, thank you, Dr. Thate. Dr. Purti, over to you. Why did PIMS decide to switch over to the ethics EEC?
Actually, I must say that once we were invited to attend a workshop, and Dr. Urmila Thate and the team introduced us to this digital platform, we were very quickly able to look at the advantages, because what was mentioned with these huge bundles of stationery and documents that are important, keeping there carefully. But once we found out we could quickly do that, and it would not overwhelm anybody of us, because ethics committee members would like to handle one file at a time. But when you have 10 files, you can decide which would do first. So looking at this, we followed immediately a workshop, which trained many of us and sensitized that this is the way to move forward. We decided to go. We haven't yet completely done away with hard copies. We still do a few of them, but we have significantly switched on to EEC and use them to our advantage.
Professor Menon, when was the ethics application system introduced in the UK? Is this a relatively new development, or has it been used for a long time?
This version that we currently have, which is in use, it's called the Integrated Research Application System. That was introduced in 2009, but it was preceded by different prior versions of an ethics form. And all of that arose from the fact that in 2004, UK decided that there would be only one single ethics opinion for the country. So that is something slightly different from India and the USA and all of. India is more like USA and those countries. We are a small country, so once one ethics committee approves, because it's based on a single law, single set of rules, then it is approved for England. So, multiple ethics committees don't look at it. So from that time, once that happened, there was an online platform, but the current one is from 2009.
The next question really is for both Dr. Thate and Dr. Purti, and you can answer this sequentially. So how has EEC added value to the submission and review process, especially during the time of the pandemic?
I think Dr. Purti may be able to answer this better. We made this, so it was really useful for us. So the pandemic, the greater advantage has been that because it's been online, we can communicate with each other online, and the software does everything for us. So including the screening, during the pandemic, when the officers weren't able to come to work in the office, it was really simple for the member secretaries to be functioning from wherever they were. Although we as medical people were going to the hospital, the office staff were unable to come because they were unable to travel during the lockdown. So they were working from home, but because this was a software-based system, we could function as a team wherever they were. So I think we didn't develop it for the pandemic, but the pandemic just happened and it really worked at that time. And maybe Dr. Purti can add any other advantages they can think of.
Yes, it has suited us quite well because even during the lockdown, reviews could be conducted. I must share the chairman was out of the state, couldn't come back. There was one of the members who was out of the country. and create helpers to put them together, because we were still able to have the review process, especially when there were deadlines to be met, specifically statutory or the funding agencies required them to do so. It really came as a boon. Of course, Kate just mentioned, when this was conceptualized, it wasn't made for such an occasion, but it's proving to be an advantage over and above some of the other advantages that we've spoken already.
Sure. And Dr. Purti, what were the main challenges that you faced as an institution while switching over to an electronics ethics system? So this is a question that has been asked by many of the participants, both when they submitted along with them, as well as in today's live session. So
yes, I think that's interesting. Reason is because most or many ethics committees that we know of, at least in India, are so used to working with hard copies, and this has been being carried out for a long time. And to come out of that, you had to have a reason to be able to do it better, to be able to do it more efficiently. And this does call about for some behavior change, for members to be able to adapt themselves to work in a digital environment. And perhaps all doesn't come at the same time. So one way of one of the challenges that we faced was when some of the senior members in the members of the ethics committee said, no, why do we need to do that? There's a problem, and we're not able to see, we're not able to review, we're not able to comment. And when that small bridge of a few of the members who find it easier to write it down instead of type it out. So we came up, you can always write it out and then scan it and put it up. So it's still a document, it's a soft copy, and it's still there, even if the typing speed, that was an issue. So, but gradually when other team members and we learn from each other, help. We always have colleagues, and I'll call younger generation. And may I take the liberty to call Dr. Amrita, one among the younger generation, at least in our group here, who are always there to help out. So in our own small working environments, we always have enthusiastic youngsters who are willing to help out. I think taking that help and support helps us overcome some of these challenges that we have faced.
I'd just like to add one, or rather emphasize on one of the challenges that Dr. Purti just mentioned, and that was about behavior change or attitude change. It doesn't need, sir, we didn't have only elderly members. There was one young man in our ethics committee who refused to remain on the ethics committee because we were going for this software. Can you believe that? I mean, he was a young fellow. And he said, no, I cannot work with soft copies. I need those hard copies. I need it in physical print for me to be able to work on it. And, this is an attitude change, which is very challenging. In fact, this is something that we have to work on, and we have to or you have to use the stick, and the boss has to say, sorry, this is going. And then everybody has to adapt to it. But by repeated training, and I think that's where the PATH team first and now the CBSE team need to be congratulated, because the efforts that have been taken by the PATH team and the CBSE team have to be recognized, because that is what has helped in making this whole effort worth it and successful.
Thank you, Dr. Thati. Professor Menon, I just wanted to ask, again, this is a question from many people, is that what additional features, is, if any, is CDSA planning to build into the software? And are there any additional features that the UK system has that we can maybe borrow and learn from?
So let me answer the first question, because we do have something that we have in the pipeline which we want to build, and that is to support the common review process that has been suggested by ICMR. So there is a guidance document in circulation for comment, not finalized, but on the ICMR website, if I'm correct, on how a common review could be done for multi-center studies. So multiple ethics committees working together. So immediately you can think that how this software could help that sharing of between ethics committees. So what we want to do is not create any process, because that is for the Indian regulatory bodies to do. But now that ICMR has suggested a process, we would like to operationalize that so that we could set it up so that for multi-center projects, and I know there have been some pilots trying to see how that would work. So we could set it up such that 5 ethics committees could work together with regards to a project. And that is the first thing we want to work. We've been a bit, it's like in the pipeline for next year, and I'm really hopeful. Because many of these things, once you build a tool, then everybody thinks, oh, it's not that difficult to share and exchange. It will just become like a review process, but the reviewers are not but they are between institutions. So that is what we would like to do, definitely. Another thing that we had thought about was the SAE module, that is the Serious Adverse Event Reporting. This is, of course, the form is now already available if you use the ICMR common form, because they have a form and we have already operationalized that. But we were thinking that perhaps we might set up a separate module for those who are not using the ICMR common form. So they are using their own form, but if they would like to have a module for SAE reporting to their own ethics committee, that we could also develop that as a standalone. So that is where we are at the moment with CDSA. We are always willing to explore other functionalities which would help this process. The only limitation, of course, is funds. So this is all funded by various funding agencies, mostly. And I must thank Professor Kang here, because she's the one who has supported us most by bringing funds to support various measures. Now, with regards to the UK, this is not run by organizations like ours. It is run by the government. So it sits within the Health Research Authority. What is their Health Research Authority? The UK. So what they have done is they have worked with many agencies. So it's a really integrated research application system. You can use the same system to apply for, let's say, the Radioactive Advisory Committee. Suppose you're doing a research project with a radioactive substance, or if you had to submit to a special gene therapy committee, because there's gene therapy involved. So through the same process and the same portal, you could do all of this, including MHRA approvals. At the moment, India, of course, that might be going a bit too far at the moment, because that's, how we are a standalone DBT funded agency. And of course, the approvals go through the Sugam platform. The Sugam, I think I've got the right name, platform, which is an online platform as well, which is very nice, where you can put in all that you need for approval. So this is one thing. But in the UK, the system is reviewed continuously to see what can be added, what more can be added. And I have seen some discussion documents which say that they want to simplify further. And one of the things they want to do is to make more generic forms, so make it more and more study specific. So each of the different study types can have more customized templates, just to make it more simpler for people to fill it in. And I also know that they're wanting to include much more online ethics reviewers training. So training in review. So have a lot of videos. And this is something I think we could also think about, to have some videos that review, if it's this kind of a, let's say if it's a vaccine trial and you're doing an ethics review, please think of these 10 things. So we could have, and this is something we can explore, of having small videos, which are very study specific from some senior ethics people, so that when it comes to the committee can just look up that video or listen to it, or the reviewer can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm really conscious about time. So I'd just like to ask one final question to Dr. Thatte, which has been raised by many people, again, like Dr. Usha Rani and others, about, the ethics of using digital solutions, and are there any regulatory approvals or any approvals needed in India to use digital platforms? So maybe we can end with that question.
To the best of my knowledge, there is no regulatory approval needed to use digital platforms. But what are the ethical implications of using these digital platforms? I can think of one very important ethical implication, and that is of confidentiality. Because this is in the realm of software, it can be accessed by different people. And what we have done in EEC is that it is password protected. But if you share your password, then everybody can access it, and that would be really wrong. So it depends on the EC member really to maintain that confidentiality and to remember that we have signed this confidentiality agreement. And therefore, according to me, that is the most important aspect. While building EEC, confidentiality of the data was flying on our mind, and they are very well firewalled and in silos. Each EC is in its own silo. There is no way two ECs' data can be seen by anybody else. So that, I think, is taken care of. The only weak point is the member. If the member shares the password, then there is complete breach of confidentiality. There could be complete breach of confidentiality, which is where the ethical implication comes up. But otherwise, there are no, to my mind, I cannot think of any other ethical implications in this, because it doesn't substitute people. People are still there. People are still reviewing. Everybody, including the layperson, submits their comments. And there is a meeting, even though it is like in today's days, it is happening online, there is still a meeting, and everything happens in the way it would have happened. It's just that a lot of our paper, a lot of trees we are saving in the process. But otherwise, I don't think, in fact, that's a good thing. But otherwise, I don't think there are any ethical challenges. And I don't think there are any regulatory permissions we need to take.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. There are, of course, many other questions, and I really do apologize to everybody that for paucity of time, we are not able to take them. But I would like to bring to your attention just quickly the upcoming webinars. And as I've already mentioned, and as has been discussed by Professor Menon, this was the first of the webinar series, and we will follow this up with two other webinar series on digital tools for participant engagement and digital tools for conduct and analysis. We also have at CDSA another exciting webinar planned on the critical dilemmas in clinical research. And we really hope you can join us for these. And I'd just like to leave you with this parting slide, which has the contact details for the toolkit and the EEC. Do feel free to write to us if you have any outstanding questions, which were not answered, which are important. If you would like a demonstration of the software at your institute, do write to us, and we would be very happy to demonstrate it to you and answer any queries you may have. So with that, I'd really like to thank everybody once again for joining us this afternoon. And I'd like to thank our panelists and all our speakers. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Thank you for coordinating this so well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.